Welcome back to another Best Bets episode. Big weekend of games on deck. Maryland had a big win tonight on the road at Nebraska as underdogs. They continue to impress here. But we have plenty of action for you to discuss for this weekend. Before we do that, I wanted to give kind of a recap. Been a pretty good week for us so far. Now up 27.5 units on the season, as you can see in our action account. So make sure you're joining that Discord, as we've said repeatedly, right? That's where all the plays are going to be. Any last second plays that maybe come out, player props that we don't write up or we don't talk about on here, because we usually don't talk about player props on the episodes because they don't come out until the day of the game, sometimes not until a couple hours before. So we've been on kind of a hot streak with those. So I'd say definitely get in on the Discord if you want to catch some of those.
Yeah, there's a lot of edges to be had with player props, and yeah, obviously, like, it is hard to talk about them like the day before or even write those up. We've been able to do that a few times, but it's a little bit harder just because, like you said, they come out day of or even a couple hours before when there's injury concerns on some front. But yeah, it's been a pretty good run this week. The last couple weeks have been pretty solid after that. We took a little bit of a dive there for a little bit, but I mean, hitting our stride at the right time. So hopefully we can keep it going all the way through the rest of the year.
Yeah, for sure. So want to jump right in. We've got a lot to talk about. We got one play for you tomorrow, plus we're going to add something new to this episode. We're each going to throw out a 2-team money line parlay. For those of you that like parlays out there, 2 teams, both underdogs, that we think could be worth throwing a few bucks on for the value. But before we do that, we got one game to discuss for tomorrow. This is UCLA at Indiana. UCLA coming off the loss in a game that they were really getting whooped, and they actually ended up making it a game at the end against Illinois. Now here they are back on the road at Indiana, who just picked up a big road win against Michigan State. -1.5 for UCLA, who's really struggled east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, they have, and I'm not going to dive into this too much because I'll have a full preview on this in the morning. But I don't mind that the road woes. Really, I think they're not really going to be traveling that much for this second game, so I don't think it's going to be all that difficult for them to get up for this game. And I think Indiana, that game against Michigan State was kind of just a one-off. They threw a 2-3 zone at Michigan State. They can't shoot, and it made that defense look a little bit better than it really was. So, yeah, I'll have the full preview out, but definitely like UCLA tomorrow.
Yeah, feels like a get right spot. As we've talked about, Indiana is not a team we're very high on. I have seen this line at 1 in some places. So, just something to monitor. We'll have, as Cody said, a full preview out on this game tomorrow. So definitely read up on that. If there's anything else that we come out with, we'll be sure to put that in the Discord. So make sure you're in on there. As for Saturday's really, as we discussed in our general episode, Saturday's loaded. Unfortunately, the game times are not exactly ideal. What is it? Houston, Arizona is at 2. Auburn, Bama is at 4. Just not great timing, unfortunately, but it is what it is. First one we're going to dive into, we talked about this one a lot on the previous episode, but Auburn, Alabama. This game's at Alabama. I think the projected spread's like 1.5 for Alabama.
Yeah, it actually got released at Alabama -1.5. So
okay, yeah,
I would assume it kind of trickles towards Alabama. People love betting these home spots against these, elite teams coming into town. Everyone thinks it's a super hype spot, but I mean, I like the matchup for Auburn, as we talked about on the last podcast. I think their ability to deny catch and shoot at an elite rate, really, and then their rim defense to combat Alabama's rim attack I think is going to play up in this matchup. And on the offensive end, I think Auburn's post up game is going to be the equalizer in this game for two really, really good offenses. I still think Auburn's the better offense of the two. And I think there's a lot of advantages to be had on the interior for Auburn. And actually I will throw out a player prop here. It's not like officially out or anything like that, but I love Janai Broome on Saturday. I call it a square prop, call it whatever you want, but I love the over here. Alabama will never double down in the post, and I think he's going to have a very good matchup against really whoever guards him. It doesn't bother me if Clifford Morey guards him. It doesn't bother me if Grant Nelson guards him. Alabama basically refuses to send two guys, so I think he's going to get all the opportunity that he wants, and I'll consider probably a ladder. Maybe if I can get a 25 plus, a 30 plus, I might actually dive into that as well.
Yeah, should be a really big game for Broome. I think the key is going to be for Alabama anyway. One, can they continue to knock down the three at the rate that they have been? And two, can they take care of the basketball, as we talked about last night? This Auburn defense is going to be in their space. So can they limit the turnovers that they've struggled with, but they've been fortunate because they've shot the ball at such a high rate lately. So I would lean the side of Auburn. I think they have the best player in this game in Broome, and I think they just have a better defense that's going to force turnovers and get easy buckets for them. So I would lean Auburn. This should be a really fun game, though.
Yeah, I agree. If this line gets to a possession underdog for Auburn, like 3.5, I really don't anticipate that happening, but it will most likely be on Auburn if it gets to that point. I'm not afraid to go against the steam in that situation. And yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, they can really shut down Alabama. Well, not shut down Alabama's offense, but they have the defensive weapons to slow them down at least.
Yeah. Next game we've discussed this one a bunch too, but more on the betting side now. Houston projected -3, or is that line out now?
That's projected. The only one that's out right now is Auburn, Alabama, but I would assume it's going to be in that ballpark.
Yeah. So Houston -3 here at Arizona. Really good matchup for Houston.
Yeah, I would call this really the perfect matchup for Houston's defense. I mean, they deny transition and they deny the rim, and those are the two areas that Arizona loves to score in. Like, they're not going to call them transition reliant because they can score in the half court, but they certainly prefer to get out and run anytime they can do it. And if Houston is going to force Arizona to win over the top, I don't think Arizona is going to be able to do it. They're 278th in the country in 3-point percentage, and like we talked about, like those guys like Love and Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis, like they can certainly shoot you out of a game. Their shot selection is a bit questionable. They're not great in the spot up game, and Houston forces you to play in that area. I think they allow spot up in like the 93rd percentile, but they're the best in the country against spot up situations. Arizona's in the 21st percentile on the offensive end in spot up. So definitely a major advantage for Houston there. And one thing I always look back at is the 2022 tournament game they played, when Arizona was viewed as like the second best team in the country. They were a 1 seed that year, playing Houston in the Sweet 16. Houston was down two of their better players and their two best perimeter players, probably in Marcus Sasser and Tremont Mark, and they flat out dominated them in the tournament game. They controlled the pace, they controlled the glass and the turnover battle, and the styles are exactly the same. The coaches are exactly the same. The philosophies are the same. So I think the game can play out pretty similar, although it's in Tucson this time. And as for the offensive end, it's not like a fantastic matchup for Houston, as Arizona has a ton of athletes everywhere and they do a good job defending the rim and they defensive rebound pretty well. But I always like backing Houston on the road because they always have a chance in the shot volume battle. They're elite taking care of the ball and they get all over the offensive glass. It really doesn't matter how good you are on the defensive glass. Houston's going to find a way to attack that area. And Arizona's also going to load up in the lane and try to deny the rim with their lack of rim protection. And it's not going to be great in this situation because Houston is 7th nationally in 3-point percentage at nearly 40%. So I do think LJ Cryer and a healthy Emmanuel Sharp finally is, I think they can have success in this game. And I personally think this is a pretty big coaching mismatch. I'm not super high on Tommy Lloyd when the game slows down late. So I really do like Houston here. I'd lay this up to 4. I don't even think we get 3. I think it's shorter than this. I'd say -2, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this got to a pick. People love betting these home spots. Arizona coming off that loss against K-State. This might get bet down to a pick. If it gets bet down to a pick, I'm absolutely on Houston, and I think everyone else should be as well.
Yeah, I still think that Arizona is probably at the peak of their market. Right, they've had a really strong, I guess, middle third of the season where they're up to 17-7. They've been at the top of the Big 12, but they haven't really played anyone, as we've discussed in a few episodes, right? Like they're playing better, no doubt about it. And they have some solid wins, but they haven't beaten anyone elite, which I think people are going to fall for a little bit here. I think that Houston's just the better team. And I don't really care that Arizona's coming off the loss. Like they need to fall back to really where they belong, at least in the betting market, because they're not as good as Houston, not even close.
No, I don't think it's relatively close. I think Houston at full strength can beat anyone in the country, anywhere in the country. Like they can go on their own and beat Auburn. I wouldn't be surprised for a second. We've seen they're a bit vulnerable at home, obviously losing to Florida, but I think they can beat anyone with their style. Their style travels, defensive minded and can win the shot volume battle.
Yeah. Next game, Texas at home here against Kentucky. This line projects around a pick. Texas coming off now two or three straight losses now. Three, right? Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and then the other night to Alabama, right? So 3 in a row. Kentucky riding high now. 2 in a row for them, right? South Carolina last Saturday, and then Tennessee in a big one at home as underdogs the other night. Now they're headed on the road at Texas, who I think Texas is just going to be way more desperate in this game. They need one. They need not only do they need a win, but they need another like resume builder. And this would be massive, even though it is at home. Like you're beating a top 10, 12 team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is a quad 1 game, no matter where it's played. So this is definitely a huge game, big time desperation spot. I mean, I think last game could have been considered a really good spot for Texas, but Alabama's offense, when they get going, is just kind of a different breed and they play at a super fast pace. So they're able to, break away from teams pretty easily, again, especially against inferior competition. But Kentucky, I think a little bit of a different story, especially with the injuries that they have right now. It looks like Lamont Butler is going to be out for this game, and not really sure about Jackson Robinson. He missed last game with a wrist injury. There's just got so many guys in and out of the lineup right now, and Butler's injury doesn't sound great as he hurt his shoulder again. So would assume he sits, and there's really no guard depth after him. Kirk Kriisa hasn't come back yet, and I'm not really a believer that Travis Perry as the backup point guard.
Come on, the 2 freshmen have been awesome.
Yeah, it's just Travis Perry hasn't really impressed me all that much. Noah's had his flashes, but I just think it's a little bit too much to replace. I think like Andrew Carr is a great player, and he's not completely healthy right now either, and he's kind of showed that in his performances recently, and his minutes haven't really been all that high. But in this game, this is like a true battle of shot making. Both teams are pretty shot making reliant, with Texas, with Trey Johnson and Jordan Pope, and then Kentucky's, playing with their hands tied a little bit with the lack of shot making they could possibly have in this game with the injuries. And the Wildcats, they're not going to crash the offensive glass, and that's a spot that Texas is typically vulnerable in. So I do think it's actually a decent spot for their defense, who I still do like the defense. I think they have solid one-on-one defenders that can contain this Kentucky group. So mostly a spot play. I'm hoping this isn't inflated to 2 or 2.5, but I probably would lay this up to 2.5 or like a minus 135 money line. So yeah, I'll take the horns here.
Yeah, I as many times as I don't like them when maybe the public does, I do like them in this spot. I just think it's a win, or they might as well start packing their bags for Cancun here pretty soon. The difference I think between 15-11 and 16-10 with a win over Kentucky is massive, massive, massive. So, I look for them to get a big one after the defensive performance they put up the other night against Alabama. Granted, Alabama made shots, but giving up 100 points at home is not something that you can be doing if you expect to win and get to March. So, big spot here. Next one, this one's interesting. Clemson minus 3.5 at Florida State. Clemson coming off two of their most dominant wins of the season. Taking down Duke and North Carolina, and North Carolina was ugly, as we talked about. Now they're going on the road at Florida State. Projects at minus 3.5.
Yeah, I would be surprised if this was actually that high. I think home spot bettors are going to be all over Florida State in this matchup. But we saw like a really, really good spot go against Clemson with North Carolina coming into town after Duke won on Saturday or they beat Duke on Saturday in a huge game. And, Carolina comes into town and Clemson just beats the crap out of them, beats them by 20. And this is kind of a similar situation. It's not a great spot. Clemson's riding pretty high, but I think this is one of the better matchups that I've seen all year. And I kind of look back at the historical matchup of this game, and I went all the way back to 2021. And Clemson, they've covered 7 of the last 8 meetings in this series, and I believe they've won and covered the last 7 of 8. And the only non-cover was against the Scotty Barnes Florida State team that was in the Sweet 16, a 4 seed. That was the best team that Leonard Hamilton had in that stretch. And Clemson actually beat them at home as well. So they split that season. And I just think the matchup has a lot to do with it. And these are the same styles. Brad Brownell and Hamilton have, deployed the same style for plenty of years now. And for Clemson, it's an elite transition denial defense. And you can consider this FSU team to be transition reliant. Their offense really plummets when they have to play in the half court. Clemson, only 10% of opponents' possessions are played in transition, and that's the best number in the entire country. So, yeah, we can consider this to be an elite defense in transition, and FSU 95th percentile in transition possessions. And I'll always trust the slower team in these spots. It's much easier to slow a game down than it is to speed up the slower paced team. So I'll always trust Clemson in this spot. And then Clemson's shell, like we call it a shell-like defense, or kind of like a pack line style defense, it'll force Florida State to shoot over the top. And Florida State has shown all year that they're really not the greatest shooting team out there. They're 246th in percentage, and they're only 307th in attempt rate. But if they're unable to get out transition and score at the rim in those situations, they're going to have to try to do it in the half court. And you're not going to be able to do it against this shell style defense. And this team trying to score over the top is pretty bad news. Like outside of Jameer Watkins, and there's really not much else there shooting wise. So really like the matchup for Clemson's defense. I also like it for their offense quite a bit. The way to beat Florida State is to take care of the ball and shoot the ball at a high level. And Clemson does both of those. They're 77th in the country in turnover rate nationally, which isn't elite, but it's really good. And I trust the guards on this Clemson team, and they're 13th nationally in 3-point percentage. And Florida State will give up spot up threes all day long if they're not turning you over. And like I said, their rim protection is solid, but Clemson doesn't really need to get to the rim to have a great offensive day. So I really do like the matchup here. I wish we were getting a slightly better spot, but I'm not all that worried about it. And I would be surprised if this actually did close Clemson minus 3.5, but I still would play it at this number.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think Clemson, if you looked at their shooting numbers, like you would think that they're due for some pretty significant regression after the way they've shot it the last week. Um, but then again, they're going to get those looks against Florida State. So, um, we'll see. This is going to be. I think this is going to really test them here. While Florida State isn't the best team they've played in the last week. Um, Still a respectable opponent, and they're going to be tested going on the road, riding high off the wins that they've had against two blue bloods. Regardless of what UNC is this year, it's still beating UNC. So it's gonna. I think it's gonna be a real test of how much you can really trust them. I think moving forward, if they can go on the road and take care of business.
I agree. Yeah, ideally it's a letdown spot, but I can't wait to see the amount of people on Twitter that have Florida State money line as their favorite play of the day. And I'll gladly go the other way of some of those spot betters.
Yeah. Got a few others. Not sure if these will be official plays yet, but more so leans. First one, BYU -6 against Kansas State. Kansas State obviously riding high right now, as we talked about, with 3 high-level wins in the last 12 days now. Playing really good basketball. Just beat Kansas and Arizona in their last 2. So now they're getting BYU, and this spread projects at 6 for BYU.
Yeah, I feel like this is the right spot to fade Kansas State. Going on this mountain trip, it's never easy for anyone going here, and I think you'd have to assume Kansas State is at their peak market value after this unbelievable winning streak, and you can only really trust Doug McDaniel and Coleman Hawkins for so long. Like, they're very volatile players. Like, for them to go on a run like this it's very impressive, but they're typically 2 guys that they're Jekyll and Hyde. They're going to have an unbelievable game one day and a really bad game the next, and I think they're kind of due for one of those bad ones, especially playing on the road in a really tough environment. And I do kind of like how BYU matches up here. I like their shooting ability against this defense. That this Kansas State defense is much better inside the arc defensively than defending the 3-point line, and Kansas State on the offensive end is shooting. They're running extremely hot shooting the ball. Outside of last game, honestly, they only shot 1 of 18 and still beat Arizona, but that was Arizona shooting 2 for 22 on the other side. So they kind of got some of that back, and
the magnets just were turned off for that game.
Yeah, they were. And you could kind of poke holes in this resume outside of the Iowa State win on the road. That was extremely impressive. Like, that's a really, really good win for anybody. Like, when have we trusted Kansas on the road this year? And playing in a rivalry game, like, obviously Kansas State's going to be up for that game.
Kansas struggles there historically, right?
They do, and especially this year, like their offense just hasn't really traveled at all. And we don't, like we said, we don't really trust Arizona, in tough games, and they kind of showed that in that game. So, like, you can poke some holes. Obviously, it's been a great run, but I just think this is a really good spot to fade them with BYU.
Yeah. Speaking of fading, next one, Providence in a pick or better against Villanova. Villanova coming off that miracle Tyler Perkins 3. Longino actually got away with a travel on that play. Bad one on the catch. But nonetheless, coming off a big win over St. John's. Providence coming off a loss they played Xavier, right? Kim English got ejected. He had some choice words in his press conference afterwards. But now here they are, looking to bounce back against the Villanova team, who now has won 2 in a row, beating that same Xavier team last Sunday, and now St. John's yesterday. So I think this is a good spot for Providence. I'm not that high on Villanova, as anyone who's listened to all 30 some odd episodes we've recorded at this point will have learned. But not that high on Providence either, but I think this is a good spot for them.
Yeah, I think so too. Villanova's a really good shooting team, but they're running extremely hot right now. They shot extremely well against St. John's, and then the game before as well against Xavier. And they have UConn on deck in a rematch on the road. So this could potentially be a game that they overlook. And I do kind of like the matchup for Providence. They're not a great 3-point defense in a vacuum, but they defend spot up situations extremely well. And Villanova, essentially, they don't rely on it, but they create a ton of value by shooting the ball with their 4-out spacing led by Eric Dixon, who is going to be a pretty tough cover in this game. But Providence was able to hold them down pretty well on the road. They lost by 2 in their last matchup, so I do expect Providence to be extremely hungry in this game, and they can kind of name their number from 3 against a Villanova team that really struggles to get out to shooters. They attempted 36 threes against them last game, made 14 of them, which is a solid number, but they got a ton of open ones in that game. And I wouldn't be surprised if, Bensley Joseph, Jaden Pierre, and others were able to hit a ton of threes in this game and potentially break away at home. It's only going to take one big run, and I think you'll probably see Neptune's team fold a little bit here and pack it in and get ready for the UConn game.
Yeah, and what's my favorite player's name?
Who, Mila?
Mila.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll even be fortunate enough to knock a couple down.
He's been better since the game we watched, but he's not the greatest.
No, he belongs in a different Division I level, like the MAC or something. But anyway, next one, UNC welcoming Eddie Lampkin, who's coming off the best game of his career, right? He almost flirted with a triple-double, didn't he? UNC here coming off that big loss. They've had all week to prep for this one. I'd expect a motivated UNC team, but at the end of the day, they got to make shots and they got to hold down the interior where, I'd expect Syracuse to be looking to feed Eddie Lampkin early and often. But UNC projects at -5 nonetheless.
Yeah, I'm not all that scared of Eddie Lampkin here, and UNC's got to be motivated to win a road game here. And Syracuse looks pretty dead, honestly. They had that performance from Lampkin, and they still lost to Miami on the road by 7. Their defense looks pretty much dead, and this team in general looks basically dead. It's just not. It kind of looks like just a backyard game. Kind of. They're running up and down, and they're getting burnt in transition, which is like kind of the biggest part of this. Is UNC's elite in transition, and because if you make them play a half court style like they did against Clemson, it's gonna make them look really bad because they can't get to the rim and score. They're going to be able to score at the rim, not guaranteed, but they should be able to score at the rim pretty much whenever they want to, getting out in transition. And even if they don't, I think the pick and roll game, their continuity pick and roll actions that don't look pretty, but I think they can have a ton of success in this game against Eddie Lampkin's drop coverage. Like, you can't really find me much worse of a drop coverage than Eddie Lampkin. So I think these guards off the speed pick and roll are going to have big time advantages just burning by him and getting to the rim. So, and I don't mind how UNC's defense sets up. That numbers wise, they've actually been a fine interior defense. They're top 100 in 2-point field goal percentage against, and they're top 100 in defensive rebound rate. So I'm not all that concerned. I just think it's more the offensive production from the bigs that, kind of gets put into the spotlight. So I like UNC. This has to be the ultimate buy low spot on UNC. It maybe not, but they're like in the 50s in KenPom right now. So I really don't see them going down much further with the talent on this roster.
Yeah. As long as UNC isn't, catching the ball 37 feet from the hoop to initiate their offense, I think they should be fine here, which I don't expect Syracuse to push them out that far.
No, they don't pressure at all.
So I expect them to be a bit more comfortable here. But who knows with the way they're playing.
It hasn't been pretty. And UNC's been pretty unfortunate defending the 3 too. Like, they don't really give up that many catch and shoot threes, and they're giving up their last 4 games. They've given up like 50% from three. So I do think they've been a bit unlucky.
Clemson did get some pretty nice looks.
They did, but some of them were from Victor Locken too, and it was you got to kind of be willing.
It's the Tace Hunter ones that were like, I'm like, man, like.
Regardless, I think there's some regression there anyway, and you can force Syracuse into some bad ones.
Yeah. Then the last one, Princeton, plus 14 at Yale. Big number here, but as you've talked about a bunch before, Princeton as a dog is a team you love.
Yeah, I do, and I'd be shocked if we get 14. This is the Torvik projection, and this game's always played pretty tight. So honestly, any number at double digits, I would be interested in playing. And this series, they kind of always flip flop as well. There's never really a sweep in the series ever. Not that I like throwing trends in. I think in the Ivy League, dogs really do play up, and there's a lot of back and forth battle in this league. And yeah, Princeton lost at home. I think it was by 7. They battled back in that game after they were down big, but the pace that they play at and their shooting ability should be able to keep them in this game against a Yale defense that's not the greatest on the perimeter. Yale might be able to dominate them inside with Princeton's lack of size, but I do like, the combo of Caden Pierce and Xavier Lee to have a nice day from the perimeter and, even potentially win this game outright. Like, nothing in the Ivy League really surprises me all that much with these teams. These teams know each other so well. Like Mitch Henderson and James Jones know each other the back of their hand. So the dog usually plays up in this matchup.
Yeah. Two classic teams in the Ivy League. The two teams that always seem to end up back in March. You got the token Harvard every once in a while, but typically these two teams. Anyway, we're going to wrap up the episode now with, as I said earlier in the episode, our underdog money line parlays. We each have one, 2-teamer. I'll start with mine just because it's tomorrow. The first one being San Jose State, who's plus 6 against Nevada, but we're going to take them on the money line. I kind of just like the spot here. I stayed up and watched that San Diego State, San Jose State game, and San Jose State punched first, obviously got up 17 in the first half, and gave up the 17-0 run to start the second half. But they honestly, they put up more of a fight than I expected once they gave up the lead. They ended up hanging around just fine. Granted, they were at home, but that game ended up being back and forth down to the wire against the San Diego State team, who's struggled a little bit, as we've said, but still a good team, especially on the defensive end. Now they get Nevada, who I think has won 3 in a row. They lost to Nevada by 11 earlier in the year, 75-64. But now that they're plus 6 at home, they may be without their top 2 scorers again. But they do have Donovan Yap, who has now played for 3 Mountain West schools, which is just mind-boggling to me. UNLV, Fresno, and now San Jose in his 5th year. So I don't know. Does the guy just he goes to a school and he's like, we lost to them, so I'm going to go play for them next year. I don't know. Super, super random. But I think that this is more of a spot number play for me. I think San Jose State, they're at home. Nevada's riding high on a 3-game win streak. Nevada hasn't been very good, not really as good as we expected them to be. So I don't mind the value here on San Jose State at home. And then the other one being Manhattan, they're plus 2 at home against Merrimack. This is also more of just a play on the number, Merrimack being first in the MAAC, and Manhattan being 7th. I think that this is just one of those home spots where Manhattan struggled. They needed a little bit. Merrimack has been the best team in the conference so far this year. Not, but they don't have a very good offense. Very inefficient, scoring like low 60s every night. So this is again just a play on the number for me. So just going to roll the dice with the home dogs. This parlay projects at like plus 550. So pretty solid value there on a couple of home teams.
Yeah. And I especially like the San Jose State one. I mean, I think that's a pretty damn good number for a team that shoots the ball as well as they do. I think Latrell Davis and, like you said, Donovan Yap, I think they can hold it down, shooting the rock, and Nevada will give up plenty of threes. They kind of like to pack it in defensively, and they're not the quickest on the perimeter. So I do think those two can break down this Nevada defense. And if the Spartans get back Aduje and McClendon, I think that only helps them a lot. I mean, Aduje's been a great player in the Mountain West as well. He's another guy, another Mountain West transfer from Utah State. So I don't know what it is with those guys. They just like to hang out in the Mountain West. But I think this is a really good number, especially if the injury news comes in and you can grab it quickly. Like if those guys are in, like just full disclaimer, I'll be playing this just plus the number. Like it'll be an official play. So I definitely endorse this one.
Yeah. And then your play, these are both projected spreads, so we kind of had to do a little bit of parlay odds projections. Your first one being St. Joseph's at George Mason. George Mason here is +6.
Yeah, St. Joe's is just a high upside team. They have a ton of perimeter talent. I think they shoot the rock at a super high level, although it hasn't really been showed in the percentages this year. Like Eric Reynolds really isn't shooting it well this year, albeit he's been a great scorer his entire 3-year career or 4-year career. Sorry. And they also have some other really good perimeter talent like Derek Simpson, Rutgers transfer, I think. And I like this defense as well, led by Rasheer Fleming, is super versatile forward. And they're playing a George Mason team that is certainly due for a loss. Like they kind of remind me a little bit of like St. John's in the Big East, like elite defense, like top 10 defense in the country, borderline. Like George Mason, this like actually might be a top 10 defense, but their offense is just really struggling. They don't really take care of the ball and they don't shoot it necessarily well. So I do worry about their late game situation, like when they have a lead. And I still think St. Joe's can kind of shoot their way to a victory in this game with their perimeter talent. So I might be taking this as an official play as well, plus the points, or even just taking it separately money line wise, because I think there's a lot of upside with this. And I think you can get it at around 210, I believe you said.
Yeah. And then the other part of your parlay here, Michigan State at Illinois, coming off that loss. They're projected +6.5 spread here. So again, I'd expect somewhere around +210, 220 maybe on this one.
Yeah, this is mostly just a play on Michigan State being able to hang around with pretty much anyone. I don't think they have the ceiling to like go on a crazy run, especially like long term, like in the NCAA tournament. I don't think they have like a super high ceiling to, continuously just take down these top teams in the country. And like Illinois is not a top 5 team by any means, but there was a pretty significant talent gap here, and they were able to beat them at home without Yakachonis playing all that much. But Michigan State's ability to, win the battle on the glass on both ends of the floor is always going to keep them in games, and it especially plays up when you're playing on the road. So I do like them to at least keep this game close, and at 6.5 or at +210 to 225 or whatever I'm going to get. I think we're getting decent value for a team that can hang around with anyone. I think they're pretty well. I think they're blowout proof basically because I think their floor is so high.
Yeah. So this one projects at what, +860?
Yeah, I think it was 851. I think is what we could get at that. So
yeah. Okay.
Honestly, I don't recommend going like crazy on these, and I don't play parlays really myself honestly, but I'll definitely be throwing a few bucks on this one just for fun, and I would only recommend throwing a couple bucks on it just because parlaying is a good way to lose money quick. So I definitely just for fun once a week is something that you should probably do once in a while, I guess.
Yeah. anyway, so that's about it for our plays. If we have anything that we're going to add, make sure you're in the Discord. We might have some player props that come out. I'm sure we will, especially for Saturday. So stay tuned on that stuff. Other than that, another fun weekend of games, especially Saturday afternoon. So if you've got nothing better to do, lock in on the TV. Should be fun. Best of luck to everyone on your wagers. Hopefully we can all make some cash, and we'll talk to you in the next episode early next week.